My name is Julia, and I am 34 years old. I've been married to my husband Waylon, who is 2 years younger for 4 years. Ever since I lost my mother in an accident during my early childhood, my father raised me. Soon after I graduated from university, my father also passed away due to illness, leaving me all alone in the world. That's why I was incredibly happy when I married my husband and become a family. We have a good relationship as a couple, and we support each other while we both work. So I believe we have a smooth and a successful married life, if I may say so myself. However, my husband and I are currently facing a significant problem. It all started about 6 months ago, on the day I had a day off from work and went out to have tea with my mother-in-law. Though it didn't happen very often, I didn't mind spending time with her.
"Please think of me as your real mother and rely on me," she said to me during our wedding greetings.
I still remember how happy I was at that moment, touched by her kind smile and those words.
"Hey, Julia," my mother-in-law said with her usual gentle smile, stirring the ice in her iced tea with a straw. "Could you lend me $10,000? The sudden request almost made me spit out my coffee. I even felt a bit of it going up my nose, causing discomfort.
At that time, I had no idea that this seemingly innocent remark from my mother-in-law would escalate into a significant problem for my husband and me. Coughing, I asked in surprise, "What? $10,000?
"Yes, that's right. Could you please help me out? I really want to buy a certain handbag," she said with a hopeful expression.
I secretly hoped that I misheard her, but it was not the case. As far as I know, my mother-in-law doesn't have much money that she can use freely. My father-in-law has been working at the post office for many years, and I think my in-laws are financially stable. However, my father-in-law is very strict with money, especially when it comes to lending or borrowing. He would hand over the living expenses and a small allowance directly to my mother-in-law every month. If there is any urgent need for money, she would have to ask him to withdraw each time. This had been their way of living since my husband was a child. So my mother-in-law took up a part-time job to earn some extra money. She must be using her entire salary as her allowance, so it was strange that she suddenly asked if she can borrow money. My mother-in-law has always been nice to me, so I kind of wanted to help her. But $10,000 is a lot of money. I couldn't make such a decision on my own.
"Can I talk to Waylon about this?" I asked.
At the mention of my husband's name, my mother-in-law's expression changed dramatically.
"No, please don't tell Waylon. He'll get angry," she pleaded.
"I'm sorry, but if that's the case, I don't think I can be of much help."
I replied, feeling apologetic. Her usual gentle demeanor started disappearing. She clinked the ice in her drink with a straw and slurped the iced tea. Then she muttered a few words.
"Have I done anything to make you dislike me?"
"No, it's not like that."
I stammered, feeling overwhelmed by her scrutinizing gaze.
"But you won't lend me money, will you?"
"No, I'm sorry."
My mother-in-law let out a heavy sigh and fanned her face with her hand.
"It's fine. After all, you and I are just daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. I was the only one who thought that we are a real family."
She said with a hint of a nagging tone, and it made me want to cover my ears. Suddenly being treated like this, I was not only angry, but also filled with a sense of sadness. In response to my silence, my mother-in-law said, as if she was venting her pent-up emotions,
"Settle the bill, okay?" Well then, and took her belongings and left.
After I was left behind, I could only stare at the receipt in silence for a while. After returning home, I decided to talk to my husband about my mother-in-law's request for money. Even though she asked me not to tell him, something about her behavior bothered me. I shook my head and replied, "It's okay. I'm just worried about her." She mentioned that there is a handbag she wants to buy, but I have a feeling that there is a different reason for it.
As we were having that conversation, my phone rang, and it was my mother-in-law.
I put the phone on speaker mode, making sure my husband could hear too, and answered the call.
"Hello, Julia? It's about the $10,000 that we talked about today. Can you reconsider it? I promise to pay it back every month from my part-time job's salary."
I glanced at my husband in annoyance at my mother-in-law, who seemed not to have given up yet, and he gestured to me to pass the phone to him. When I handed him the phone, I heard the story.
I've heard the story.
He started talking to my mother-in-law. She probably didn't think my husband was listening nearby.
You tattletale.
I heard my mother-in-law's angry response. My husband shook his head at her childish words and told her,
If you have a problem, at least discuss it with me first. Don't trouble Julia.
he warned her.
But I thought Julia would lend it to me since she's so kind, she replied.
Indeed, I must admit that I hesitated to say no to my mother-in-law's request for a moment, so she probably read me correctly. After thinking for a while, my husband finally spoke.
Alright, just this once. But remember, this money represents the hard work, both Julia and I put in, so use it wisely. We'll also make you write a proper loan agreement, and of course, I expect you to pay it back.
Upon hearing my husband's decision, my mother-in-law repeatedly said, "Thank you," with gratitude. This is what my husband told me later on. But my mother-in-law has been living without buying the things she wanted to buy to match the frugal lifestyle that my father-in-law likes. While borrowing money from others is not commendable, perhaps my husband had his reasons to agree to it. As promised, my mother-in-law wrote a loan agreement and she received the $10,000. However, this started a bad trend. My mother-in-law began asking for money more frequently, with varying amounts like $100 or $300 each time, slowly increasing the debt. Both my husband and I kept lending her money when she said she really needed it. Even when we asked her to repay it, she would bring up the fact that we are family, and there is no way to resolve the situation, while we were also at fault for not setting a strict repayment date. My mother-in-law has taken advantage of it, and she has never paid back even a penny. The fact that we couldn't firmly stand our ground, especially when she brought up the family relationship, was something my mother-in-law knew well. Moreover, she seemed to underestimate the significance of the loan agreement. However, even among close relationships, there's a matter of manners and courtesy. My husband and I were getting fed up with her rude behavior, and we were starting to consider telling my father-in-law everything. Perhaps we should have done that much sooner.
Enough already.
I sighed for what felt like the umpteenth time.
Julia, please don't say that.
My mother-in-law was once again trying to persuade me over the phone using her sweet, cajoling voice.
We've already lent you $20,000 in total. You promised to repay it little by little from your part-time job's salary, didn't you?
I retorted sharply and my mother-in-law stammered. But
Anyway, we won't accept any contact from you other than a call about repayment. If you try to borrow money without repaying, I would definitely tell my father-in-law this time.
she was trying to say something, but I ended the call without giving her a chance. A week passed and I received a message from my mother-in-law. I had thought it would be another request to lend her money, but when I read the contents, I was surprised. She said she was ready to repay and wanted me to come alone to their house to collect it. To put it simply, that's what the message said.
Of course, I'll go with you.
My husband offered, worried about me. However, I decided to follow my mother-in-law's instructions and went to their house alone. In return, I asked my husband for a favor. On the promised day, I visited my in-laws' house as planned.
I've prepared $20,000.
My father-in-law said, handing me a brown envelope.
May I confirm it?
To be safe, I began to count the money right there, and my father-in-law scolded me loudly. What's with the attitude when you're in a position to receive help? Show some gratitude. Although I was surprised by my father-in-law's intense words, it was the words "receive help" that made my hand stop from counting.
Excuse me? Actually, it's my husband and I who helped.
I said, and my father-in-law frowned, looking displeased.
What? According to my wife, you and Waylon are in trouble and needed help. He said.
My father-in-law and I both turned our gaze to my mother-in-law at the same time. Instantly, she turned pale and looked down, refusing to meet our eyes. Since my mother-in-law was flustered, my father-in-law kind of knew what I was saying was true. He asked me what was going on.
About half a year ago, my husband and I started lending money to your wife. We made an agreement for her to repay little by little from her part-time job's salary, but she hasn't paid back a penny. Today, she finally said that she would pay back and asked me to come here to collect it.
That's not true. Don't be fooled, Julia is lying.
My mother-in-law desperately tried to cover up. But I explained everything while showing my father-in-law the loan agreement. So her excuses wouldn't work. My father-in-law was trembling, saying he couldn't believe it. At that moment, my husband joined us at my in-laws' house. Upon my favor, my husband went to pick up someone who lived in an apartment nearby. The person that my husband brought was his sister, Freya, who is 5 years younger than him. Seeing her, my mother-in-law turned even paler.
Why is Freya here?
My father-in-law tilted his head in confusion, but Freya pouted and audaciously sat down.
That the $20,000 we've been lending has been entirely supporting Freya's life, right?
My mother-in-law perhaps knew that making excuses wouldn't do anything anymore, so she nodded with a heavy sigh. According to what my mother-in-law said, my sister-in-law had a history of being irresponsible, such as being late, absent without leave, and playing games on her phone during work hours, and had been warned by others for her lack of seriousness. Due to her repeated negligence and a major mistake at work, she ended up getting fired from her job. When my sister-in-law told my mother-in-law about that, my mother-in-law apparently said, "Come back to our house." However, my sister-in-law was adamant and refused, saying, "I'll never go back home because I don't want to be scolded by Dad." My sister-in-law apparently suggested this to my mother-in-law with a twinkle in her eye, as if it was such a brilliant idea. When my mother-in-law first approached me saying that there was a bag she wanted to buy, it was merely a pretext to borrow money, and my mother-in-law admitted to this as well. Honestly, my mother-in-law is also at fault for agreeing to such an idea. After the initial success of getting the first $10,000, my sister-in-law got a taste of it and started spending money not only on rent and living expenses, but also on hobbies like anime and games. At first, my mother-in-law tried to stop her, but it seems she eventually got carried away with the fun of spending money and started enjoying luxurious outings with her. I can't believe our hard-earned money was used for such things. We knew from the beginning that she was not good with money, but hearing it again makes me feel empty. As for how I discovered my sister-in-law's existence, it was because I followed my mother-in-law every time my mother-in-law received money from me or my husband. She would go straight to meet my sister-in-law and give her the money. When I was told to come to my in-law's house alone, I felt a little uneasy. But it turned out to be a good opportunity to expose everything. Perhaps my mother-in-law wanted to make my father-in-law pay $20,000 to me, while making me the scapegoat. Both Waylon and Julia are making a lot of money when they have no children. We are family, so it's only right that they help me out since I lost my job. Besides, it's the money that Mom borrowed from Waylon and Julia, so it has nothing to do with me. She couldn't take the judgmental stares from anyone around her anymore, and she resorted to making excuses. Is it my fault? She started crying. How can she make one excuse after another when she involved not only me, but also her own family, for her own selfishness? As my husband and I looked at her in exasperation, my father-in-law's angry voice rang out.
Both of you, cut it out already? It's disgraceful.
His furious expression was nothing compared to when he yelled at me earlier. If a demon were to possess someone, they might look like this.
Both of you as grown adults taking someone else's money, have some shame. Apologize to Julia and Waylon.
When my mother-in-law saw how angry my father-in-law was, she quickly started apologizing. She kept saying, "I'm sorry," like a broken record, and she looked pitiful, but I shouldn't be fooled. My mother-in-law just wants to elicit sympathy. On the other hand, my sister-in-law with the solemn face said, "Dad already paid back the $20,000, so it's okay now, isn't it?" The patience of my father-in-law must have reached its limit with my sister-in-law's words. He grabbed her shoulders with both hands.
Ow, that hurts. Stop it. Apologize. I'll make sure to make you pay back this $20,000. Even if it takes a long time, so be prepared.
As my father-in-law forcefully held down my sister-in-law, she cried and finally apologized to us. "I'm sorry." Amidst the crying of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, my father-in-law apologized to us again.
Both of you, I'm truly sorry, especially you, Julia. I shouldn't have yelled at you earlier.
Then my father-in-law looked at my crying mother-in-law and sister-in-law.
I've had enough of both of you. It almost ends here. I've had enough of both of you.
He said coldly. My mother-in-law, who associated cutting ties with divorce, got up quickly and clung to me.
I don't want a divorce, Julia. Please stop my husband. You're my daughter too. You're on my side, aren't you? I just wanted to protect Freya.
How many times have I heard these convenient words? I grabbed the hands of my clinging mother-in-law and slowly pried it away. When I first greeted you, you told me to think of you as my real mother, and that made me so happy. My mother-in-law's expression brightened. I continued,
But in reality, you only treated me as your own daughter when it was beneficial to you, and you never considered my feelings. I don't need a mother like that.
My mother-in-law twisted her face and insulted me, saying, "Weak daughter-in-law." My father-in-law held my mother-in-law down and said, "I will handle the rest so you two can leave now."
Without looking at my mother-in-law, I put the $20,000 in an envelope in my bag.
Freya, it all started with your dependence. It hurt your family this much and caused a lot of damage. Your mother was also in the wrong, but what you did was even worse. Reflect on your actions and pay back the money to your father. I said this to my sister-in-law, and then my husband and I left the place. A few weeks later, my father-in-law visited our apartment. He said, "I'm sorry," and handed us a package. There was $5,000 inside. When I tried to give it back, he said, "It's not much, but consider it compensation." My father-in-law insisted. With my husband's encouragement, I accepted the money. My father-in-law apologized to us again and told us what happened afterwards. My mother-in-law resisted until the end, but it turned out that she had used my father-in-law's credit card without permission as well. So they ended up getting divorced. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law were kicked out of their house, and now they live in a relative's inn and work there while blaming each other every day. Actually, after the commotion at my in-laws, I found out that I was pregnant, and both my husband and father-in-law were thrilled. I plan to use the $20,000 I got back and the $5,000 in compensation from my father-in-law for my baby.